Hi, welcome to our professional development series titled, What Does the Law Have to Do with It? Understanding the letter and intent of partnering with families through federal education laws. I'm Dr. Tracy Gershwin, professor of special education and board certified behavior analyst. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you about educational laws and understanding the letter and intent behind them. There's three major objectives that I'll be addressing today. First, I will be describing the U.S. federal general and special education laws, specifically IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, regarding family professional interactions. Second, I'll be helping you develop an understanding of the implications of the terminology used within the laws related to family professional interactions. And finally, I'll be identifying strategies that build trusting and equitable family professional partnerships. When it comes to the law, we hear oftentimes the letter versus the intent of the law. I used to hear the spirit a lot too, but now we're using the intent because it's a little more actionable. But let's talk a little bit about the letter versus the intent of the law. The letter of the law is the literal reading of the law, and that's basically the actual policies and regulations. The intent of the law is the overall aim or goal behind the letter of the law. So this is the why, if you will. Why is this law in existence? Why do we have these policies and procedures? When it comes to the two federal education laws, Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, and IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we can see that there's two very different areas within these two laws that I'd like to acknowledge. The first is that ESSA applies to all students that are enrolled in primary and secondary school. This includes students with disabilities. It also focuses on a school-wide approach to education, whereas IDEA applies to students with disabilities only. And we know it actually even more narrowly applies to 13 categories of students with disabilities only. It also focuses on an individualized approach to education for students who are eligible for special education services. That individualized education program is a big hallmark that is intended to provide the free, appropriate public education for students with disabilities. Now, that's the letter of the law. Let's talk a little bit more about the intent behind ESSA and IDEA. The intent behind ESSA is to provide all children a significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high quality education and to close educational achievement gaps. When we look at the intent of IDEA, it's about improving educational results for children with disabilities as an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. So now, keeping those in mind, let's talk about some things that we know specifically about ESSA and IDEA. So the Every Student Succeeds Act, 2015 reauthorization, included terminology language change from parent involvement to parent and family engagement. I like to emphasize this change from involvement to engagement because it reflects a shift in expectations for professionals interacting with family members from taking part in a process to maximize family member efforts. So ESSA deliberately made this change to increase engagement rather than involvement. There's been quite a bit of literature that's been starting to really break down language we use too. For example, we say things like parent engagement, parent involvement, parent inclusion, parent collaboration. All of these things are potentially loaded terms. So we want to be very careful with what we're saying. And ESSA wanted to be incredibly deliberate with that. Meanwhile, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act emphasizes the importance of strengthening the role and responsibility of parents and ensuring that families have meaningful opportunities to participate in the education of their children at school and home. So where am I getting at with this? when we look at both ESSA and IDEA, I'm going to provide you a brief analysis in the next few slides about passive interactions versus active interactions that are written into these two laws. And so this is very important because when it comes to family professional partnerships, and we look at the letter of the law and we look at the intent that we just described, we also want to look at the use of language and how language and terminology may indicate how we can or cannot be involved as family members or as professionals. So for example, there's passive interactions in the law and there's active interactions. And in a study I did with a colleague where we went through both ESSA and IDEA, we read through all the federal language and terminology. We did a textual analysis of the language use and identified passive interactions as professionals providing family members information that was void of family member input. So passive meaning families do not really need to be involved. It's something where educators are doing to the families rather than with the families. And then there are active interactions that are defined as direct interactions between professionals and families, whereby family input is required, expected, and intentionally sought out. So now we're going to look through both ESSA and IDEA, and we are going to identify the language that's used in both laws that identify both passive and active interactions with families. Obviously, the active is what we'd like to see more, and I think is more aligned with the intent of both of these laws. So we want to see more active. That being said, there are some cases where passive interactions are needed, and I would encourage those of you who are educators, policymakers, advocates, family members, etc., to, as you're learning about these passive interactions, think about ways that you might be able to go one level deeper than the intent of the law and make them more active. Because we know that the more active families are involved, the greater the outcome for students. So here's an example of passive family professional interactive language that's written into ESSA. We have language that uses words like provide, outreach, notify, and invite, inform. So examples from the law that are passive are things that say, for example, an educational agency will provide the parents on request and in a timely manner information regarding professional qualifications of the student's classroom teachers. Another example of passive is outreach. Each local education agency receives funds under this part shall implement an effective means of outreach to parents of English learners to inform the parents regarding how the parents can be involved in the education of their children and be active participants in assisting their children. Another passive language use is notify. Parents shall be notified of the policy in an understandable and uniform format, and to the extent practicable, provided in a language the parents can understand. And finally, invite or inform is described as each school district served under this part shall convene an annual meeting at a convenient time to which all parents of participating children shall be invited and encouraged to attend, to inform parents of their school's participation, and to explain the requirements of this part and the right of the parents to be involved. Now, if we look at active excerpts from the ESSA law, we look at language that is more actionable, like, for example, jointly develop or agree. Each school served under this part shall jointly develop with and distribute to parents and family members of participating children a written parent and family engagement policy agreed upon by such parents. Another actionable language use in ESSA is share responsibility. So a school parent compact that outlines how parents, the entire school staff, and school students will share the responsibility for improved student academic achievement and the means by which the school and parents will build and develop a partnership to help children achieve the state's high standards. Involve is described as action-based by saying that parents and family members of children receiving services under this part shall be involved in the decisions regarding how funds are allotted for parent parental involvement activities. So you see in these active family professional interactions, there's a variability. It's things like being directly involved in student discussions, as well as being directly involved in decisions about funds and district-wide changes and shared responsibility. Now, if we look at the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act idea, let's look at some examples of passive family professional interactions in their language terminology. Similar to ESSA, we have things like receive, which is a statewide system shall provide at a minimum for each infant or toddler with a disability and the infant's or toddler's family to receive a family-directed assessment of the resources, priorities, and concerns of the family and the identification of the supports and services necessary to enhance the family's capacity to meet the developmental needs of the infant or toddler. Provide all children with disabilities who are participating in programs and projects funded under this part shall receive a free appropriate public education, and that those children and their parents are provided all the rights and procedural safeguards described in this part. And finally, inform. Procedures designed to ensure that this notice fully informs the parents in the parent's native language, unless it is clearly not feasible to do so, of all procedures available pursuant to this section. Now let's look at active language that's used for family professional interactions in IDEA. Again, you can see there's active language use like assist, procedures that require the state education agency to develop a model form to assist parents in filing a complaint and due process complaint notice. We have the requirement that a written individualized family service plan is developed by a multidisciplinary team, including the parents. Consult. In the case of a child with a disability who transfers, the local education agency shall provide such child with a free, appropriate public education in consultation with the parents. And finally, enhance capacity as active language use, described as a family-directed assessment of the resources, priorities, and concerns of the family and the identification of the supports and services necessary to enhance the family's capacity to meet the developmental needs of the infant or toddler. These are just some example active and passive excerpts from IDEA, obviously from the different parts as well, to address the different age groups we meet in IDEA. Now let's look at the Individualized Education Program team membership. We have this team membership, the letter of the law, written in as the parents of the child, not less than one regular education teacher of the child, not less than one special education teacher of the child, or where appropriate, not less than one special education provider of the child, a representative of the public agency, an individual who can interpret the instructional implications of evaluation results, and at the discretion of the parent or the agency, other individuals who have knowledge or special expertise regarding the child, including related services personnel as appropriate, and whenever appropriate, the child with a disability. Now, this is the letter of the law that states specifically in section 300.321 of IDEA, these key IEP members are required to be in attendance of the meeting. But the intent of that is the expertise that these individuals bring. So we know that parents are there because they bring the expertise of the student. The regular or general education teacher is there because they have knowledge of the general education curriculum standards. The special education teacher is there because they have knowledge of the specialized instruction and the student. The role of the representation of the local education agency representative is there because they know the school district, state policies, procedures, and laws. We have an individual who's there who can interpret the instructional implications of evaluation results because we want someone there who can provide expertise about evaluation procedures and implications. And the student is obviously there because they have expertise of themselves, and we want them there. And then finally, you might have other individuals who have knowledge or expertise regarding the child, including related service personnel as appropriate. That person might be there because they may have specialized expertise area, such as occupational therapists, speech language pathologists. They might have a special expertise of the child. It might be, for example, a private behavior analyst that works with them that understands working with that child in the home, in the community, and they're not affiliated with the school, but they have that expertise that they can bring to that team. And so what I want to emphasize here with this intent discussion of the roles of the IEP team members is that it's more than saying that they need to be there. Their intent is that they bring this level of expertise that we want to encourage and have present throughout that IEP meeting. I do want to emphasize, unfortunately, that the student is listed as the last member in IDEA, and it's listed as therefore I've listed them as the last member in this, but I think they should be listed as the first member and then the parents, because going back to the individualized education program, the individual, I believe, is the most important member of that team. So why active parent participation? Why parents as a member of the IEP team? We know that parents are the expert of their child. They are an expert in their child. They know their child more than anyone knows them in different contexts and in all different situations in the home, school, and in the community. So the definition and the intent of the letter of the law here is that we have active parents involved. So we want the parents of a child with a disability to be members of the IEP team who interact to determine the educational needs of a child, including the development, review, and revision of the IEP for the child. So our regulations say that we have parents as a member of the IEP team to interact and develop this. Now let's look at what goes in an IEP document. The development of an IEP requires statement of the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, statement of measurable annual goals, including academic and functional goals designed to meet the child's needs, description of how the child's progress toward meeting the annual goals will be measured, statement of the special education and related services and supplementary aids and services, statement of any individual appropriate accommodations that are necessary to measure the academic achievement and functional performance of the child on state and district-wide assessments, and statements of transition services needed if applicable. Now, while this is not about what goes into the IEP, we're talking about the partnership variables of the IEP meeting process. I wanted to pull this up to show that there is an intent, an acknowledgement written into IDEA that parents are active members of every component that I just shared. So parents should be active decision makers and partners in understanding and developing a statement of the child's present levels, a statement of the goals, how the child's going to meet those goals, etc. So these are some very important intentions for families to participate. And what that means is, essentially, in short, parents are intended to be active collaborators throughout their child's educational program. If we define collaboration, we see it as a style of interpersonal interactions that exist between at least two parties having equally valued contributions and sharing in the decision-making process and accountability necessary to reach a common goal. So we've talked about the letter of the law, we've talked about the intent, and the intent of collaboration means that we should have families and professionals working together to have equally valued contributions and shared decision-making throughout the process and accountability to reach our common goal. So knowing that we have barriers to family professional interactions that are acknowledged in our literature, let's talk about some of those barriers and what those solutions are now that we've talked about the letter and the intent. Because what's most important in discussing the letter and the intent of the law is that we've got the letter written, we've got the intent of it, but unfortunately, because of the nature of our system and because of the challenges that families often face without having background coming, most family members don't have a background in education or special education when they find out they have a child with a disability. And so we know that the law can be incredibly daunting. And so although we have the letter and intent of the law that says family members are active contributors throughout the IEP meeting process, Unfortunately, much of that is not realized in practice. The majority of our research shows that families and professionals are not able to interact in a meaningful way. Families are not being invited and encouraged in the active way that's been intended by the law. So here I'm going to talk about some of those barriers to family members being active participants in the IEP team, as we just described, and talk about potential solutions to those families so that they can be those active, meaningful partners that we want, that is intended in the way that the law was written. So barriers, one is an inequity, that there is a noted power imbalance that exists between families and educators throughout the special education process. So some potential solutions would be to encourage families to invite a family friend or local advocate to school meetings. That includes IEP meetings, school, parent-teacher conferences, etc. Providing families with training and resources so that they can be able to meaningfully participate, and making sure that the training and resources we provide are culturally responsive to address the unique needs of all the different families that we serve. And then finally, offering the facilitated IEP meeting process. It can be used for prevention as well as conflict resolution, or all areas of the IEP meeting. But sometimes having a facilitator present can change that power imbalance and make it more equitable for families and educators to work together and have that meaningful IEP that we intended in our idea when it was written. So facilitate IEPs, promote shared decision-making, group consensus, and a neutral facilitator who is available to generate thoughtful and meaningful dialogue. The next barrier that we've identified is language, communication, and cultural barriers. These can come in the way of family professional interactions without meaning, without any ill intent. It just happens because of the way our system is and because of our differences that are so unique. So instead, some potential solutions would be to provide families with access to a cultural broker who is someone that may be from the culture of the student or the family, who can act as an intermediary and an advocate between the family and professionals that can provide that level of support. Also connecting families with other families for social and navigational support. And then finally, providing navigational resources or information that can provide the families with the necessary information so that they can learn to understand more about the system. And that certainly includes putting it in the native language. Another barrier is noted differences in the values, attitudes, beliefs, goals, or expectations about the student. A solution for that would be to offer the facilitated IEP meeting process, utilize conflict resolution strategies, such as mapping the conflicts or others. And then finally, we have systemic and procedural set challenges that exist. And that is inherent in the way that special education is created. So one way we can address that is to connect families with the State Parent Training Information Center that's in our region, in our state, which we know all states have, as well as connecting families with other families and or resources that include information, as well as navigational support for understanding idea, procedures, and practices. Special education can be really challenging. The law can be really challenging for even the most educated families, even family members who are professionals who are trained in special education will say that they have had challenges when advocating for their own child's needs. So keeping in mind that there are barriers that exist, and we have to be deliberate if we really want the intention of IDEA to follow through in that meaningful partnership we want to see between families and educators. And then, in summary, as we bring this all to a close, when it comes to understanding and remembering and acknowledging our federal education laws, the intent and the letter of the law, let's always remember when and how these all began. ESSA and IDEA, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, they all happened because of families and individuals with disabilities and advocates. And those groups of people came together to share their common experiences and advocate for a more meaningful experience for students with disabilities. These family members wanted to be involved, inserted themselves throughout as many changes we could with our legislature and policy changes. We've had several reauthorizations, but let's always be mindful that parents are, family members are pioneers when it comes to our system of special education. And so IDEA recognizes and acknowledges that, and so does ESSA. And they have procedures and practices built in so that we can include these family members without them having to insert themselves in the ways that they felt they had to in the early days for pioneering, for the advocacy to pass these laws. So as we move forward and we remember the letter and the intent of the law, remember our families are pioneers and that they are very much wanting to be involved and should be involved and included as much as possible to reach that ultimate outcome we want for students academically, behaviorally, socially, and emotionally. And that is the end of our series. Thank you.